Welcome to Not Another PD, the podcast for helping professionals who are over dull trainings and death by slideshow workshops. I'm Jasmine Purcell, social worker, coach, supervisor, and self-proclaimed boundaries queen. Each week, you'll hear real, honest conversations, sometimes solo, sometimes with expert guests. Think insider perspectives, practical takeaways, and a focus on your well-being, not just how you show up for clients. This podcast is about you, the human behind the caseload, the human behind the profession. So, what are we waiting for? Let's get started. Episode 12. Welcome again, Jess. So Jess is an accredited mental health social worker, and this is part 2 of our conversation together. And I would encourage you, if you haven't already listened to part 1 of my conversation with Jess, which was episode 11, where I've introduced Jess and we spoke then about burnout, organisational culture, and also values as helping professionals. I would encourage you to go back and listen to that conversation. And then now this is the second part of our conversation. Welcome back, Jess.
Thank you so much.
It's so great that we're able to talk about this important topic, which is supervision as a burnout prevention or recovery tool. And so just picking up from where we left off in our first discussion on episode 11, where we were talking about burnout, how did supervision really support you both during and after your burnout experiences?
It is wild to me that supervision is still so inconsistent, particularly in the helping profession space. So often I still hear people saying that their supervision isn't great, it's quite task focused. So I felt really lucky that I had fortnightly supervision at a minimum, regular check-ins outside of that from my supervisor, but also the supervision was a space where I could go and just talk about what I needed to talk about. And it was a space where I was able to be really vulnerable, and I felt safe to be vulnerable as well with my supervisor. But also I was able to then unpack and make meaning of why I was feeling the way that I was. And there's sometimes things that we can't do in a supervisory space that we do need to then go and get professional support from a counsellor or therapist to be able to support us in processing and moving forward and healing from. But definitely supervision, if I wasn't having fortnightly supervision, I don't know whether I would have been able to sustain myself in the work as long as I did. But then also I don't think I would have been able to go back into my role.
Sometimes there may be more that you'd need to unpack or explore, that it may not fit within, I guess, the confines of supervision, and then it may be more appropriate to seek external counselling. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
So I always say that supervision, we can go wherever we need to go as long as it has a line to the client or the practice. And so sometimes, absolutely, I would have supervisees coming into supervision and talking about some things that were happening in their personal world, and being able to then make sense of how does that then impact them being able to do their work? Do we need some other supports or considerations to be able to support them to navigate that? I think for me, I wouldn't unpack and go into why the supervisee was feeling that way based on kind of childhood experiences as I would if I was a counsellor. So it's very different. I think you're working with the person as they come rather than thinking about the complexities of what else might be happening for somebody based on their previous experiences. It can be quite complex, and I think a lot of supervisors say, I don't want to talk about that, that's personal, you need to go speak with someone else. As long as you have a trusting, safe supervisory relationship, and you're both feeling comfortable. You're not doing counselling, but you can definitely provide a therapeutic space for that person to share what's happening for them.
Sometimes in the work that we do as helping professionals, it can bring up something in us could then be triggered, either something that's currently happening in our personal life or something that's happened historically that can then sort of unfold. And I'm a big sort of promoter of EAP as well. So I'll often say to my supervisees, if they're really struggling and they're sometimes struggling to be able to reflect in supervision, maybe how some of these, it could be a childhood experience or something else in their personal life, and perhaps they're struggling to reflect on how this is impacting their work, that even sometimes 1 or 2 EAP sessions can be helpful to sort of unpack that further.
Yeah, absolutely. I think sometimes organisations can use EAP to deflect poor supervision. When EAP is recommended alongside good supervision, absolutely, I think that's a really great resource for people to be able to tap into. But when organisations maybe don't have a great culture or aren't supporting their people, and they're coming to managers and saying, I'm not doing well, when the response is, well, maybe speak to EAP, often that can feel quite dismissive and make people feel not valued.
I've definitely seen that pattern as well. So it's something that, unfortunately it can be a bit of an excuse, either not receiving supervision at all in the organisation or receiving really what I'd call operational supervision, very admin, very task focused, and it's not reflective. Jess, you mentioned the importance of having good quality supervision. And I think some people think, and organisations may as well at times think, that supervision is just surface level reflection. How do you see it going deeper and actually really supporting practitioner well-being?
Yeah, so it's really interesting because I find that when I first started providing clinical supervision, no one really tells you what you should be doing. And there's this sense of like, yes, you provide a space, yes, you tick things off, it should be consistent. But I think there was just such a gap around how do we actually support people to have this space as a resource for them to be able to continue to do their work. And so for me, surface level didn't cut it. I could see that people were open to exploring their practice at a deeper level. And when I then listened to my supervisees and what they needed from that space, while at times I was wondering, am I doing the right thing? Is this okay? I don't want it to feel like counselling. But it never tipped into that. It was still supervision, but people were able to really process why they were feeling maybe stuck with certain clients and shift through that. I think when you have an experience of a supervisee feeling stuck with a client, then using supervision to really make meaning of that and them coming away feeling hopeful and excited to be able to connect with that client. We need to connect with the person in front of us. They need to be a person and not just a staff member or not just a task that we have to be doing. There's so much scope for what supervision can be.
What I've seen as well is that often supervision is not prioritised by managers, and you can see this in supervision being rescheduled, once, twice, 4, 5 times, and it keeps being rescheduled, and that sends that clear message to that employee that the manager or even perhaps the wider organisation don't value the importance of supervision, because if supervision can be rescheduled that many times, then it's not prioritised, and also it's leaving the supervisee without adequate support for often extended periods of time. If supervision is supposed to be fortnightly, but it's been rescheduled so many times that now it hasn't happened for 6 weeks, then I guess that's a bit of a sign that there is potentially a culture in that organization or in that team that supervision isn't really valued and it is just a tick a box exercise.
And even on that, Jazz, I think for me, doing this work requires us to do it with other people. We can't do this work in isolation. And as soon as we start to feel like we are doing it in isolation, it then starts to add a lot of pressure and heaviness to us as practitioners, feeling like it's up to us to make sure that clients are safe and okay, that they're supported, but we have to overextend to be able to do that. But with my supervision, I really like to make sure that my people are feeling held and supported by me, and I'm with them on that journey. I'm not kind of power over or making decisions on their behalf, really making sure that people feel like we are a team and they're not alone in this work.
And that can sometimes be the difficulty in organizations if your team manager or your supervisor is the one providing your supervision as well, then they do essentially have power over you because they're also the one that you report to. So I do love when I hear that organizations either fund external supervision for their staff so that it kind of separates the kind of that line management from the reflective supervision space, or in some spaces they'll actually, or some organizations, they will have a clinical supervisor that provides the supervision that's different from the staff member's direct line manager. So I think there's definitely some positives I've seen in this space. One of the things I know that's helped me as a supervisor is drawing upon different tools and resources. And one of the tools I'm loving at the moment is your supervision menu. I've spoken about it a few times, both on my Instagram, but also I share it with the supervisors that I supervise. Your supervision menu is a really flexible framework to use. Could you tell us a little bit more about your supervision menu and why you felt the need to put this together for all of our supervisors out there?
Well, I actually created it for myself initially. And so I was noticing a theme where I was supervising a team, and sometimes it felt tricky to be able to engage in supervision. They were incredible practitioners, but sometimes they showed up and needed something different. I used to start my supervisions with just a calming kind of breath. I'd have some room spray and just supporting people to orient into the space and just disconnect from anything that had happened in the day and just coming into that calming space. And I had a supervisee say to me, "Oh, I really like when you do the body scan with me. Can we go through a body scan?" And then I thought, some people like the breaths. Some people like a body scan. Some people like just listening to some calming music and having the spray. And I thought, if I use my knowledge of trauma-informed practice and neurobiology, so thinking about how our brains and bodies need to connect sometimes if we're not feeling overly safe, what do we then need in order to feel safe? So creating the supervision menu was my way of going, how do I bring all of that together to be able to give my supervisees options based on how they were showing up for supervision on that day, knowing that each day is going to look different and their needs are going to look different over time as well. So the supervision menu starts with an entree. I had it framed like a hearty meal. So being able to start well, have a main focus, and then finish well with some dessert.
I'm so glad that you've created this, because this is what was really lacking both in my own supervisory practice, but also for me as a supervisee, because it actually reminds me the importance of reflecting and not just jumping into this is my agenda, this is everything I want to have covered in supervision. So I think it's also helped to kind of slow down my really busy brain as well. So I thank you for that, Jess, for creating this resource. Jess, in part one of our discussion together, you were talking about other tools that you used in supervision. So of course you use your menu, as do I, but you did mention that you use the ProQOL resource. How can supervisees or supervisors themselves use this as a bit of a check-in? And can you let us know how you've used it in the past or currently use it?
Yeah, so as a supervisor, I would use it with my team every 3 months. So being able to check in consistently and see what's happening beneath the surface. As I mentioned in part one, there's often times where we're just go, go, go. And maybe even as a supervisor, I miss things as well. And so being able to have another tool to be able to go, okay, what's actually happening for me right now? And what do I maybe need? I always made it optional for people, or didn't say you absolutely had to do it. But I found people in my team wanting to use it so that they could check in with themselves and see what was actually happening for them, and maybe then bringing that into supervision to have a conversation about what they need.
I can also make sure I put a link to the ProQOL in the show notes as well. So anyone who's not familiar, they can go and check it out. Then you can reach out to Jess or I and let us know if you found it helpful. It's always great to hear about some of these suggested tools and resources because there's so many out there. So that sounds like a really great one that I'm definitely going to check out myself, Jess. So thank you so much. What would you say to helping professionals who may be hesitant about supervision, or perhaps they may see it as a ticker box exercise, as we've spoken about, some organisations may see it that way, or just to complete their minimum supervision hours to maintain their professional registration? What would you say to those helping professionals?
You're not alone. I think that it's so common to experience supervision that doesn't meet your needs. I really encourage people, though, to see if you can access external supervision, and finding a supervisor that you connect with, that you feel safe with, that you can talk about what's actually happening in your work. Often there's certain thoughts about what supervision should be like, and as you said, Jazz, some expectations are that it is just a ticker box and being able to be task orientated, and that works for some people, but to be able to sustain yourself in the work and to do this work long term, doing really reflective supervision is really important for that.
I know for myself, early on in my career, I was just so focused on I need to meet my minimum supervision hours, but now I actually think about, well, what are my goals in supervision?
Once you find your person, you should look forward to supervision. It shouldn't be something that you dread.
I can't thank you enough for coming on the podcast again in part 2 of our conversation. And as our listeners may know by now, that I do like to ask a signature boundaries question at the end. I wanted to ensure that I'm asking you a little bit of a different question to what I asked you in episode 11. So Jess, if you could go back and give your younger professional self one piece of boundaries advice, what would that be?
I think I would tell her that you are in that role for a reason, and you may be experiencing all the imposter syndrome and self-doubt and feeling like you have to meet the needs of your manager or your organization, but being able to remind yourself you're in this role for a reason and you just need to be you. And so believing in yourself and knowing that you're enough to be able to then meet the needs of your clients, I think is something I really probably needed to hear back then.
Thank you so much, Jess, for joining me again on the podcast. Jess is an amazing clinical supervisor. You can check all her contact details out in the show notes, including getting a copy of her amazing supervision menu. Jess, thank you so much for coming back on the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Jazz.
Bye. Thank you so much for listening to Not Another PD. If today's episode resonated with you, share it with a colleague who could use stronger boundaries, less burnout, and more balance. And don't forget to subscribe. Until next time, keep saying yes less.